Massachusetts Down Syndrome Progress webinar workshop is entitled How to Work Effectively with Your IEP Team. It's presented by me. I'm Blazejewski. I'm the Education Director of the MDSC. If you have speakers on your computer, you don't need to call in. However, if you don't log to be on the phone, it's perfectly fine, but it's not a requirement. Now, once we get started, I really encourage you to use this chat pane right here on the left-hand corner of your screen for questions or comments, and I will address them as we go along. So please give me your feedback as we're going through and ask any questions that you may have. So I'd like to get a little bit of information from all of you. So I'd like you to start out and describe your level of experience with the IEP process. Just take a second and just kind of click where you would consider yourself at in terms of where you are and where your child is in school. So just take a second, give me your feedback, and just to get a little bit of information about who you guys are. All right, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself before we really get started. So my disclaimer is that this presentation is based upon my experience. It isn't research-based. You're not going to find statistics that go along with what I'm going to be talking about, but it does come from my experience as a special education teacher. So I had spent, up until this June, the past 17 years teaching in public school. The past 13 years, I have been teaching with my special education certification. I've worked as a special ed teacher, an integrated classroom teacher, and an inclusion specialist. I've been in all those capacities, and I've worked with a lot of families and a lot of special educators and a lot of administrators. So I have what I would like to consider a really good perspective of sort of what is happening on the other side of the table as you sit there as parents. So part of what I'd like to do today is to sort of talk about what the perspective of those teachers are, and to talk about some tips how you as a parent can really develop an effective relationship with your IEP team. So some overall truths that I would say I've experienced and most special educators would agree to. The team really does want what is best for your child. They care about your kids, they're teachers, this is why they're there every single day, and they really do want what's best for your child. You guys may not always have the same perspective all the time, but at the end of the day, your child is central to what they're working for. And that being said, the team will make mistakes. At some point, the ball will drop. This is human nature. There's a lot more, every year there's more and more being put on teachers' plates in terms of responsibilities, and teachers aren't necessarily being given the resources to absorb some of the workload that they have. So that being said, we're all human. When our plates get full, the ball drops and we mess up or we forget something or we don't return an email. And so a teacher really appreciates sort of a gentle reminder when something has dropped, but just kind of know that it doesn't necessarily mean that you should lose all confidence in your team when little things happen. So just kind of want to put that out there. The assumption of best intentions creates a strong, more honest relationship. When you kind of know, you know what, we're all human, we're all working hard for the same purpose for your kid, then it really, really strengthens the relationship, and both you and the special educator will be able to be more honest with each other. And the team definitely appreciates parents who advocate for reasonable things. Your voice is very, very important, and your advocacy makes their job easier, especially when you're advocating for something that's really necessary and reasonable. They really appreciate the voice that you have on a team. Now, that being said, teachers really do have to watch what they say. It kind of gets drilled into your head. You don't want to be the one responsible for the district being sued because of something you may have said in conversation or something that you may have done or said within the context of a team meeting. This is sort of it's something that as you work in the special education system, you know that you never want to be on the stand during a hearing, you know, because you're the one who told a parent, off the record, you know what, I think that you should be advocating for this. So that being said, teachers really do have to watch what they say. And the administrative budget definitely is the elephant in the living room. Your teachers could be advocating for you behind the scenes, but aren't able to discuss this advocacy with you for many of the reasons that I just spoke about, especially if it's related to a resource that costs a lot of money. We all know that school district budgets are not, bottomless. There's always constraints on the budget, and when when you feel as though your child needs a source, for instance, a one-on-one, that's a quote unquote big budget item. It's a staff member, that's a salary that they're paying for. You know, you can be advocating for it, and your staff may be advocating for it as well. You just may not be as aware of it because, again, of those reasons of making sure that when push comes to shove, there is the administrative budget. So, keeping that in mind, you can be empowered. Make sure that you speak up and ask questions if you're uncomfortable with something. So an open, honest dialogue goes a long way to nipping potential problems in the bud. If there's something that just is making you feel uncomfortable, definitely speak up and touch base with your teacher, or touch base with your special educator or your chairperson or somebody that you think you can get the answers from. I hear from a lot of parents that they don't want to be the pushy parent, or, you know, everybody really wants to have a good working relationship with their teen, and some people may feel uncomfortable with sort of asking those questions or questioning things that may feel a little uncomfortable for you. Again, teachers appreciate parent advocacy, especially if it's done in a very respectful way. So make sure you just ask those questions, because it will really create the open and honest dialogue between you and the team. And another thing that parents say to me a lot is that when they go to a meeting, they feel like they're the only ones who don't speak educator lingo, or I'm the only one who's not a teacher. I don't know as much as everybody else sitting around that table. So I'm empowering you and saying to you that you are way more powerful than you feel. So a knowledgeable, tenacious, and respectful parent can affect a great deal of change for a child. And in fact, give teachers the resources that they can't necessarily advocate for themselves in some cases. I know that one parent knew that their child needed a one-to-one aide in the classroom for safety reasons. This is a 3-year-old in a preschool, and this child couldn't navigate stairs. There were a lot of safety issues, and she was integrated into a typical preschool, an integrated preschool, and the teacher only had one paraprofessional. And despite the fact that this teacher was, you know, I know that this parent found out after the fact that this teacher was really advocating for some more support in the classroom, because she just couldn't do her job with the level of resources that she had. However, it was really the parent who was able to affect the change in a way that the teacher never would have been able to do. So Don't be afraid to try and advocate for your child. When you don't make it personal about the individuals on your team, then odds are your team will absolutely respect you for doing that. So we're going to focus today on parts of the IEP, where to put your energy. The whole IEP is really important, but there are a couple of places that I'm going to highlight in this presentation that you really want to pay some attention to and make sure that you really advocate and make sure that it's exactly as you want it. So the first place that we're going to focus is on the parent's vision statement. This is a really good place to document your expectations and your thoughts and your feelings. Um, Sometimes the vision statement gets crafted at a meeting when the chairperson may hear all of the things that were sort of talked about at the meeting and just sort of the chairperson sometimes will just synthesize what was said at the meeting. Um, Here's an example of a vision statement developed by a chairperson. And it's actually written as the team, which it really is the parent's vision statement. But the team would like to see the student continue to develop his social and behavioral skills so that he can achieve at his age level in all areas. This would include maintaining pace with his classroom academically and with socially appropriate behavior, interactions, independence, self-care skills, and following directions consistently. Now that's a fairly meaty vision statement, but this parent made sure that they fleshed it out a little bit. So here's an example of what can be added by parents to really sort of stretch out the vision statement and perhaps make it broader than just focusing on the school-based piece, because we know that we look at our children as more than just the child sitting in the classroom. And we want our educators to look at our children globally. And this is a really nice place to include your global vision for your kid, for your child, because this is a place where it's documented, it's part of a legal document, and it's something that you want to revisit year to year. You want to be making sure that the ongoing trajectory of your child's programming is connected to sort of your big vision. So I encourage you to take some time and really flesh out what it is you would like to see your student doing, your child doing. To look here, there's the pieces about being a fully participating member of the class, school, and broader community. Again, it takes it from just the classroom to the big picture. Maintain friendships with peers, both in and out of school. We would like him to develop his generous, empathetic personality and maintain his curiosity and love for learning. We want him to be a well-adjusted student who overcomes his challenges, contributes back to his community, and is one inspires those around him. So that's certainly a parent's voice there, and it's very nice to have the parent's voice in this section of the IEP. Here's another example of a parent vision statement. I'm not going to read this whole vision statement. This was a parent of a child with autism, and the way that they crafted their vision statement was focused around really articulating what they see as where the student's needs are. So this student had some global needs. They really crystallized it to the big ones that they had the most concerns about. And then they also articulated where they felt as though education and related service needed to focus their attention in terms of intervening and focusing on these areas of concern. That doesn't always mean that that is what the IEP is going to be crafted around. However, again, it's documented, it's in this legal document, and the parents had their voice. And again, if over the years, at the annual review meeting, when you go back and look at this vision statement, if you still see significant holes or deficits, in where your student's functioning is, you might want to be able to, it gives you leverage in terms of changing the programming or perhaps adding services because some of the things that were in that initial statement, really aren't getting addressed. And again, they don't have to be very long, but, part of this one will continue to make progress in an inclusive community where the team will recognize and continue to work on her strengths, hold her to high expectations, while providing the student with a high level of support to compensate for her vulnerabilities associated with Down syndrome. Some big pieces there are inclusive community and, the high expectation piece that, yes, my student has challenges, my daughter has challenges, but I really want to make sure that within this community that's being supported and you're rising to be, we want our kids to rise to the occasion. Another example of a vision statement to sort of speak about something that your child may not be ready for yet. This was written by a parent whose child was in a sub-separate classroom and they wanted him to develop stronger communication skills to support the behavioral regulation. And they articulated in the vision statement that they want increased opportunities to work in an inclusive setting and eventually be in a full inclusion placement when this child has the skills to do that. Again, it's something to revisit every single year. So this was written at a student's 4-year-old integrated he was in a preschool, a sub-separate preschool, and the parents should look at it again when the student transitions to kindergarten. Okay, where are we at with this vision or this goal? Is this something that we see being able to happen this year? If not, what are the goals or what programmatically do we need to put into place to make sure that this happens? So I know that this format of a webinar is different than a face-to-face presentation. So again, I certainly encourage you to type in some questions or type in any comments or let me know if you want me to expand on something that I've been talking about. So the next section of the IEP that I really encourage you to pay close attention to is the accommodation section of the IEP. I often say to parents that the content listed here is a battle to pick. So again, in my experience as a special education teacher, working closely with general ed teachers, as an inclusion specialist, when a teacher would come to me and talk about a student's lack of progress or a student's difficulty with accessing curriculum, a fourth grade teacher might say to me, this kid's teacher told me that they could do all of these things, but I'm not necessarily seeing that right now. This is the page you want to go to because many, many, many times what is happening is that the teacher isn't implementing the accommodations with fidelity. Implementation of accommodations really is at the heart of your child's success. So the power of the accommodation is huge. So it may seem like a little thing. That's really kind of what it is. When you look at this list of things that's on your screen right now, they are little things. I'm going to give this one as an example. Give directions in single steps. A teacher will look at that and say, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. Give a direction in single steps. I do that. I don't give a lot of directions at once. I break things down for kids. But what a teacher isn't realizing is that when they look at a student and say, okay, get your pencil and your writing folder and then go meet me at that round table. What they don't realize is that was actually 3 directions that you gave all at once. And when 10 minutes later, 10 minutes later is a long time, but a few minutes later, 4 of the 5 children are sitting at the table you wanted them to be at their folder and the pencil, and your one student isn't there because you given 3 directions at once, and that child didn't even know what to do with that. Those are the little things that can really make or break whether or not a student is successful or independent with some of the things that you want them to do. On the next couple of pages, I'm going to give some examples of some accommodations that could be put into place. This checklist right here is something that I use with a lot of my students when I work with them. And this is really supportive of kids with executive functioning issues, which we know that children with Down syndrome certainly have executive functioning issues. This one has a lot going on it, and especially for younger kids, it would probably be too much for them. But it's consistent use of an organizer like this at the beginning of every single activity would be very, very supportive to a student to sort of remind them of the things that are expected of them as they're sitting and getting ready with an assignment. It talks about what you want for the regulation piece, all the materials, and then it reminds them of exactly what we're going to be focusing on right now. What is the learning target? Right now, your learning target is to add together 2 numbers using a hundredth chart. That could be the learning target. Then you can break down each of the jobs, and at the end, it's really nice for kids to get into the habit of evaluating their work habits and evaluating how they did. Again, it's really simple, and but it's certainly something that can again make or break a student's success once they get started. This would ground them if you use it for a child who has some executive functioning weaknesses. In addition, this picture right here goes back to using some high interest material to engage the students in the learning. So this was something I used as an activator with a couple of the students that I was working with. These boys loved their sports, however, they were not so interested in math ever. So this is kind of the do now that I did with them. Again, it just took a couple of minutes to do. This was part of the accommodations. There's not a lot going on the page. There's really only 2 questions. But it was an immediate reinforcer to see some of their favorite basketball players on the page. It went a long way to sort of getting them to tune into the assignment, and it really helped them activate their learning, and it helped keep them on task once we got started. So again, it's a little thing, it's a small thing, but it goes a long way to sort of getting their mind where you want their mind to be once you get, once we're going to get into the more difficult or instructional content materials. Okay, so another part of the IEP I wanted to talk about was the additional information section of the IEP. This is an important place to document or clarify anything in the IEP that isn't fleshed out in any other place. So an example of this is to clarify services that aren't associated with goals and objectives. Behavior consult is often listed in additional information. Different districts use this additional information section differently, so the functionality does vary. So I worked in a district where we used additional information a lot. We put a lot in there. We fleshed things out we fleshed out pieces that weren't explicitly stated in other parts of the IEP. But I've worked with families who have said, you know what, my district said that they don't do that. They don't use additional information. And again, it's really more of practice district to district, but it isn't that something can or cannot go into additional information. So I'm going to give an example of what a service in additional information looks like. So this was initially written as the behavior specialist will consult and work with student and the classroom teacher for a minimum of 60 minutes per month. Now, this this is very standard. This is fine in the IEP. There's something I want to show you is how a parent looked at this and wanted it fleshed out a little bit in additional information. Um, it was fleshed out to this. The behavior specialist will consult and work with the student, classroom teacher, special teacher, and the rest of the team for a minimum of 60 minutes per month to ensure regular team communication and consistent implementation of student behavior plans throughout his school day. So it talks about why the program is designed, what are the things that the behavior plan is going to focus on. It really explicitly states the challenges that the student particularly has. Now, a parent encouraged the chairperson who wrote this IEP to clarify this a little bit, and I think that that's something that a parent has an eye for that a person wouldn't necessarily have an eye for. And not a person, excuse me, that a team member wouldn't necessarily have an eye for. Because there's an assumption that everyone on the team will know what the behavior specialist will consult 60 minutes a month will actually look like in practice. However, you want to make sure that this document will be functional for you if you were to move. So if you're in one district and you move to another town or another city over the summer, you would want this IEP to be really readable to the next team who gets it. And the behavior specialist in one district might do something differently than a behavior specialist in another district. So fleshing out exactly what that service looks like in additional information is a little bit of an insurance policy in terms of making sure that anybody could pick up this IEP and implement it with, you know, with a clear understanding of what the spirit behind what was written. So I would encourage you to kind of look at those things as a parent and say, you know what, would this be clear to anybody who looked at it? And it's a nice checks and balance for the team who's actually writing the IEP. So I want to also speak about content modification. We talked about accommodations, and accommodations are things that can be, they're small things that can be done in the classroom that doesn't have to do with the content of what's being taught, but more about maybe changes to delivery or changes to, or supplements to delivery that are going to help your student access. Content modifications are actual changes to the content that's being taught at that particular grade level. So an example of an accommodation is to break directions down into small steps or reduce the number of problems on a page. So even though the majority of fifth graders are getting 10 multiplication problems, your child might only be getting 2 multiplication problems. That isn't a content modification, that's still an accommodation, despite the fact that there is change to the workload. Content modifications involve ongoing communication with the team. This is one of the more challenging things that teams are faced with because a general education teacher and a special education teacher need to have the time to communicate and discuss what those content modifications will actually look like. You'll see the need for content modifications in the present level of education performance. And you want to make sure that modifications are meaningful to the student. So here's the part of the IEP that you'll see it right here. The content modification. So under the present level of educational performance, Part A, general curriculum, you'll see this here. An example of how it can be written is content modifications may include limiting the scope of the curriculum taught to the key concepts, providing opportunities for repetition and review of materials to ensure mastery. So that's one way it could be written. Another way it could be written is teach salient components of content or curriculum. So it's noted there that what will happen is that the breadth of content taught to everybody else may not be what your student is going to be getting. The methodology or the delivery of instruction really talks about how, okay, there needs to be multisensory, systematic instruction for this student to access curriculum. There needs to be structured language instruction. There needs to be previewing, reviewing, and direct instruction of concepts with frequent check-ins for understanding. You know, that talks about how is the material going to be taught. So here's what the Massachusetts Grade 5 ELA writing standards look like. So there's a lot on there. I'm not even sure if you can read them all. But there's a lot of standards associated with grade 5 in terms of writing. One thing on there is to write an opinion piece on a topic or a text and supporting your point of view with reasons and information. So that's just one standard in the grade 5 English language arts writing. And most grade 5 students end up writing a persuasive writing piece at some point along the year. So the Department of Ed also has a resource guide. And what this resource guide is a way for teachers to sort of look at taking those standards and finding entry points for every single student. So it moves from the less complex within this is actually grades 3 to 5 because they build on each other, but the less complex of those standards to the less complex down here, and it gets more complex as they go along. So I'm going to show you an example of something that I helped develop with a team for a 5th grader who we decided that really what we were going to focus on is a shorter writing piece that focused around this persuasive piece, but we knew that we would have to do more scaffolding for this particular student than for the rest of the 5th grade classroom. So where they were building in a lot of elements to that persuasive writing, we started off with really focusing on fact or opinion. What's the difference? Because we knew that for this student to be able to eventually, with support and accommodation, write a piece of persuasive writing, we knew that we would really need to solidify with this student the difference between a fact or opinion. So this is a sample of modified work. Other students were doing one thing, the same topic, but these were 2 worksheets that this particular student used. This was one where it just kind of broke down the difference between fact and opinion. And on this, and on the one on the right side, excuse me, apologize. See that? On this side, it was something that the student actually had to do, where they had to check in and see, where they had to actually make the decision, was this a fact or was this an opinion? And again, there was some high interest materials integrated into this particular worksheet. Do you have any questions so far? I want to stop there and make sure I'm not just going to keep going. Again, anybody can type questions or comments into the chat pane over here. Looking like good so far, but please write anything at any time. Okay, another portion of what I want to talk about today is what does effective homeschool communication look like? So It should be structured and designed to communicate specific information. I worked with parents, I've worked with students, and I've worked with paraprofessionals who sometimes spend a lot of time with a student with communication log, and it doesn't feel effective to anybody involved. So it should definitely be individualized, and it should be developed with targeting the things that you really want to know. I had one paraprofessional who worked with me who used to write 3 pages, kind of a summary and an analysis of every single day, which really became very labor intensive. And when it switched from, this paraprofessional, this is kind of how she did it, and the parents certainly appreciated such a long, thoughtful synopsis of the day. But when she moved on to something else and another paraprofessional was in that role of one-to-one for a particular student, the homeschool communication was briefer. It was, bullet points. And the parents felt like they weren't getting what they had gotten before. So it kind of became a messy situation. And so we ended up really designing something based upon what the parents really wanted to know about the student's day, and also about what the school felt like they could use in terms of feedback from home around certain things. So um, there's also the piece of being aware of the amount of support in a classroom related to the homeschool communication expectations. So a student with a one-to-one can usually have a little bit more in terms of homeschool communication than if there's just like a part-time parent in the classroom. Um, so an example of a communication log that's very, very functional and talks about, really targets what the parent wanted to know and what the school wanted to know from the parents. So, for instance, this communication log was developed for a family where the student came home, the student had limited language abilities, and well, all students, when you ask them, "Hey, what did you do in school today?" You get nothing. Or my daughter says to me, "I ate all day." So she'll tell me when I asked her what happened in school, and I really know that that's not true, but that's basically it. I don't get anything else from her. So, but especially for our kids with some significant language challenges, we get a lot less. And so this parent wanted to know who did they interact with? What did they do today? What kinds of things did they learn about? What can I follow up at home with in terms of some of the content that they're doing at school, so they can sort of carry it over and maybe look at a YouTube video or read a book or get a book at a library. So they this one focused on the social interaction. So this top part here really is about who the child played with, what did they play, what were some conversations that the student has, and even though the conversations were very heavily facilitated by the para, this parent found that at night, when they were eating dinner, they could say, "So you talked to Mary today, and you talked about Christmas? Mary wants an Xbox just like you." It was a way to sort of facilitate the conversation and stimulate some of the language related to school. Um, Again, it was, there was some curriculum that went on here. And it also gave the parent the heads up on some of the things that were upcoming in the classroom. We're going to be working on electricity soon. This gave the parent the heads up that, if they headed to the library this weekend, they might want to get a little book on electricity or point out something related to electricity. It just gave the parents a way to connect with what was happening at school. On the same token, there really wasn't that much for the staff to fill out, which is good because the more user-friendly a document like this is, the more you're going to get out of it, and the more likely it is that it's going to be implemented correctly. So this was something that they found very effective. At the same time, there's also the family notes and comments. This is a great place for you to let the team know something that you've done with your as a family. Because when it comes down to writing or other times in the classroom where connection to content is encouraged, it's great for the teacher to know that it's great for the teacher to know what you've done in your house because again, your child isn't necessarily raising their hand and saying, "Oh, we went to New Hampshire last weekend." But if the teacher's reading a picture book about kids who go to the mountains, they stop and say, Johnny, you went to the mountains with your family last weekend, didn't you? And it's a way for the teacher to bring your child into conversation or part of the group instruction, just by giving them just sort of glimpses into what your child's life is like outside of the classroom. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about today is the behavior piece and the importance of keeping the lines of communication open between you and the team. So, in my experience, behavior and talks about behavior and issues with behavior in school are absolutely one of the most anxiety producing and sometimes contentious issues related to home and school. Um, I'm going to say off the right from the beginning that perspective taking from both sides is really important along with the communication. And we know that students with Down syndrome or children with Down syndrome often present with, mild to moderate to severe behavior issues. And this is certainly one of the major factors that interferes with the student's ability to access and participate in the general curriculum. So it's one of the things that I think every single parent, and I've been there, as soon as the teacher talks to you about something your child has done, behaviorally, our first instinct is to get a little bit defensive or get embarrassed. Where it's okay, all students have behavioral issues to some degree at school. All students, need redirection. I always say to my kids, my own kids, nobody's perfect. We're all working on something. So when your team approaches you about a behavioral issue, this is this is the time for you guys to really work together as a team. So the first thing I will say is that as soon as you and your team start talking about some behavioral issues that are interfering with your child, I would absolutely recommend that you be proactive from the very beginning and consult the behavior specialist at the first sign of trouble. You really want to do a functional behavior assessment sooner rather than later when behavior issues are coming into play. So there's a little flow chart here at the bottom about a functional behavior assessment. It really, you have an outside person, an objective behavior specialist. This is what they do. It could be a board certified behavior analyst, or somebody who just can come in and objectively look at the behavior, identify the specific behaviors, as well as sort of what the triggers are or the antecedents, and really try to determine what the function of the student's behavior is. All behavior has a function, and knowing the function, knowing the antecedents can really help develop a plan for reshaping behavior. And to talk about the perspective piece, this cartoon kind of shows that differences in perception are absolutely one of the primary reasons that behavioral issues can create such tension between home and school. Um, where I'm going to go back to the slide for a second. It's, when I think about my own children's behavior at home, things aren't as high stakes at home as I know that they are at school. And I think that when my child's teacher, so speaks to me about things that they're seeing at school, you kind of want to come to your child's defense and you think, well, we see this at school, but it's not really, we see this at home a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal, and this is how I did at home, and it can it can absolutely kind of create this tension. And so what you have to remember is that this is the most important time to work as a team. And that picture is really, we want all teams sort of look that happy and excited about tackling any problem. So as soon as behavior issues start to arise, in the very, very beginning, you really want the team to identify the specific behavioral concerns that they have at school. And then as a parent, I encourage you to reflect and try to identify where you may see similar types of behavior at home or in other settings, maybe transition. And then being as objective as possible, think about identifying ways you respond to these behaviors. So I'm going to give, again, examples from my own life. We know that our kids demonstrate a lot of attention-seeking behaviors, and they also demonstrate a lot of avoidance behaviors. So I'm going to speak to avoidance behavior that my daughter has. She hates having her hair brushed. And so sometimes when it's the morning time, we'll go to brush her hair, and she has a big tantrum around us brushing her hair. And my husband deals with it a little bit different than I do. For him, he will say, well, it's not that big of a deal. I don't really need to brush her hair. She can go to school with messy hair, which is true. It's not important that her hair is brushed. However, it's very, very important that we don't somehow let her know as parents that tantruming is a way to escape something that you don't want to do or non-preferred activity. So, she starts to have the tantrum around her hair being brushed. My husband will put down the brush and say, fine, that's it. You're not going to have your hair brushed. That's fine. Go to school with messy hair. And I'll jump in and I'll say, no, you can't do that. You can't give in. And, he and I joke a lot because he'll say, oh my gosh, you're always a teacher. You never take off your teacher hat. And there is, working for 14 years with students with significant emotional and behavior issues, it does get a little ingrained in you. And that's a small example of how if my teacher said to me, when I ask Emma to, work on a fine motor task at school, she'll have a tantrum. And it's hard to kind of sometimes see the connection between the tantrum that she may be having with getting her hair brushed to the tantrum around doing some kind of fine motor or writing activity at school. But when you think about the function, she's trying to avoid each task. She doesn't like getting her hair brushed, and she really doesn't like writing. So we have to make sure that at home, when she's having the tantrum, we don't put our hairbrush down and say, you know what, forget it, go to school with messy hair. Because the teacher doesn't have, it's a higher stakes activity at school because teachers can't say to kids, you know what, you don't have to do math today, or you don't have to do writing today, or pick up your pencil, or do any of those things. Because our kids don't generalize behaviors setting to setting. So again, we may be unintentionally reinforcing something at home, and if we're continuing to do that and your school is trying to intervene, like they're trying to do a targeted intervention around behavior at school and it's not working, then the problem gets bigger and bigger. So again, this goes back to being the happy team. Have an honest conversation and admit to your teachers, you know what? This is what I do when she's brushing her hair, because they're not going to judge you on that because none of us are perfect. Every single one of us reinforces our kids' behavior at some point or another. Was there a lot of TV watching at my house today during the snow day? Absolutely. Because we do these things sometimes because of our own sanity. But when you work together as a team and talk about, getting deep into those behaviors and identify as a group what we're going to do to extinguish these behaviors is going to be really important because some behaviors are easier to manage, ignore, or redirect at home than they are at school. A tantrum in my house is way less disruptive than that exact same tantrum in my daughter's classroom. And again, it's I can just walk away and go upstairs and do something different until she realizes I'm not going to pay any attention to her. But in a classroom with 20 other kids and 20 other kids who are a lot of them are vulnerable to either a tantrum going on in the classroom or disrupting their own learning, it's really much harder to manage it in that setting. So again, so significant and frequent unexpected behaviors in the school setting. So let's think of it in the social thinking context. These behaviors are unexpected. Um, it's hard for staff to manage, particularly in an inclusion classroom when the frequency and the severity starts to interfere with the instruction of other children. Because schools don't have the resources to manage these behaviors, especially if it involves issues of safety, even with a one-to-one aid. And even if there's a behavior consultant involved, they're generally not school-based, so they're not available to provide the hands-on support in times of crisis. So I'm going to go back up here to the frequency and severity piece. Again, all kids have their moments. It's the frequency and severity that you want to really be in touch with your team with, and you really want to work together as a united front to make sure that you're on top of that because it becomes a habit for our kids when if they have, like bolting is the perfect example of a severe behavior in terms of the safety piece. If your child is bolting a lot, there's an extreme frequency there. That's when it's more of a 911 problem, for lack of the special ed teacher in you. You really want to make sure that you're coming together and as an entire team, you're working hard to extinguish that behavior. So again, you want to prioritize and have high expectations. So we know that school is really hard for our kids. Our kids bring anxiety to the table. They bring, there's a lot of talking at school, and we know that receptive language is, it can sound like your teacher is like Charlie Brown's teacher all the time, and it can be grating to kids. They need frequent breaks. So we do understand and we can empathize with a lot of the motivations behind our kids' behavior. But we owe it to them to let them know with all certainty what will and will not be tolerated. Because we know that we want our kids to live as independently as possible when they become adults. And again, once the behavior becomes a routine for a kid, it's much more difficult to extinguish it. So you want to make sure that you don't assume that just changing the environment or the antecedents or the triggers alone will do the trick for extinguishing the behavior once students start exhibiting them. An example of that is, okay, we know that this student is feeling overwhelmed. There's a lot of language. There's not enough visual support. The student's not accessing the curriculum. So we start to see some attention seeking or escape behaviors, which, I'm going to give a low level, which might be putting your head down on the desk and refusing to pick your head up. That was the behavior that we had from one of my students a couple of years ago. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that behavior isn't necessarily severe. It doesn't affect the rest of the classroom, but we know that the student isn't accessing curriculum at that time. So the implementation alone of integrating visuals may not be enough. We want to work on teaching what you expect of kids in conjunction with, putting your head down isn't really a big, a real big problem behavior, but bolting, for instance, is. So you want to make sure that kids get the message that bolting will never, ever be tolerated because it's not safe. And you want to be sending that message in conjunction with teaching appropriate behaviors to express thoughts or feelings. So you absolutely want to make sure that appropriate accommodations and supports are going to be implemented by the team to support the success of the student. But the the explicit teaching of what is expected and to have these high expectations for kids is absolutely imperative to make sure that students are really successful and able to regulate themselves in classroom. So here's an example of something that I did with a student. This student had some this student had an emotional disability. This student had some neurological issues related to prenatal substance exposure, and so what the behavior actually looked like in school was some very explosive, sometimes physical fights with other kids. So she really had a hard time recognizing when something was a big deal or a little deal. So, you know, her pencil would break and she would really have a gigantic tantrum, or someone would look at her and she would start screaming, "Why are you staring at me?" So this student just really had a hard time sort of really gauging what the problem scale, gauging the level of severity for the little problems that happen to all of us in school every single day. So we worked a lot on kind of gauging, all right, what does a number two problem look like? All right, you didn't like the direction that the teacher gave you, or you didn't want to work on a certain activity or with a partner. Okay, does this mean that you scream and yell or stomp your feet or wave your arms, which would be what would happen? The teacher would say, okay, take out your math book, and should really have a big reaction to it. We really try to teach her that, no, here's what you can do. You can have a quiet sigh. You can think, oh, I don't really want to do this right now. You can think that to yourself. All of those things are okay. So we were really trying to teach her some replacement and getting her to stop and think before she had one of these big reactions. And this is just an example of the work you do in conjunction with, no, you're not allowed to push somebody just because they bumped into you when they were at your locker. That's never ever okay. Because when this student becomes an adult and she flips out at somebody at a grocery store, that they're not going to have, no one is going to be as sympathetic to that as we might be in our hearts because we know where it's coming from. So again, that goes with these really high expectations that we have of kids. Nope, that's a never ever behavior. We're not gonna tolerate that. Here's what you can do instead. You're frustrated. You don't like that direction. You can think to yourself, oh, I don't really like that, but you may not do this. And so we worked for a real long time on this. And again, it's not perfect, but we saw progress. And that's what a team wants to see in terms of behavior. We know that nothing is perfect and there are always blips. However, we want to see progress. We want to see reduction in the frequency of these behaviors because then we know we're in the right direction. So that's the end of our presentation. I would encourage anybody right now to ask specific questions here in the chat pane. Let us know what you think. Anything you want me to expand upon or any comments that you want to add for the group, I would encourage you to do that right now at this time. getting a question. Hold on a second. So the question right now is, do you have an example with a summer program service delivery grid? I don't have one offhand. I do have some, but not that would be easily accessible to me right now. So are you curious about what summer service programs would look like, or what would be expected in terms of what you can expect from a summer program in general in terms of the services? So we're just waiting for the typing for those who are waiting. Oh, okay. So the question is, should the services or aids, etc., be a part of the delivery grid for the summer program? That's a really good question. Um, I would say that it really is very program specific. Um, so if your student is typically, if your child is typically in an inclusion classroom with a one-on-one aid, and if they're going to be part of an inclusive camp, then I would make sure that the summer services and the supports in the summer replicate what happens during the school year. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily mean that the amount of special ed services or related service is the same. Um, summer services need to, summer services are designed to prevent substantial regression. You'll hear that a lot. And teams actually have to prove that a student will have substantial regression over the summer. However, the level of support that a student needs to just sort of access the day should be mirrored in terms of what the student has over the summer. So if your child has a one-to-one aid in an inclusion classroom, then there should absolutely be, an aid supporting in what the summer program should look like. However, sometimes the staff ratios in a summer program sort of build in some of that additional support. Um, so again, you kind of, if the program itself already takes care of those ratios and mirrors it, then that might not be something that you need to necessarily advocate for. Okay, so then the question is, this particular student does not currently have an aid, but if regression is a huge concern, should that be added to the summer service delivery grid and or added to the additional information? Not necessarily. Um, again, the what the what a district is mandated to do for the summer in terms of the regression piece is to implement just enough support to, and I don't mean to sound trite when I say just enough support, but I'm kind of thinking on the legal aspect here. There needs to be just enough to make sure that that student doesn't lose substantial ground over the summer. We know that all students regress a little bit, but we want to make sure that there's not substantial regression. And the implementation of an aid would not be something that a district would probably consider just for a summer program. If this student is, if the team feels as though this student might need an aid, then it would be something that you would probably need to do some kind of reevaluation for, and it would be something that you would probably need to be advocating for the year, for the typical school year as well. So generally, the summer services grid would not add a support like an aid if it's not something that the student has during the year. Does that answer the question? Tell when someone's typing for the rest of you. I don't know if you can see that in the chat. So there is something coming. Okay, so the question is, how do we make them implement the IEP or ensure they're following the service delivery grid? Um, is this is this in general or for the summer services? So I am going to, oh, in general. Okay, so it is tricky. And I've had this conversation with a lot of families. Please and thank you. You're welcome. I've had this conversation with a lot of families. It can be hard to know whether or not services are being implemented with fidelity. I would go back to if this is something that you're concerned with, I'm going to actually go back to the slide where there's the homeschool communication. So if we look at a slide like this, and I'm going to change the color here for what I've written. So these were the things that this particular family wanted to focus on. You know, it's hard to know exactly what is happening during the day, but what I would do is design some homeschool communication and have one of the things, you know, one of these boxes explicitly saying the teachers I saw today are whatever. So if you know that your student is supposed to have speech twice a week, you know, OT once a week, special educator 5 times a week in class or whatever, you know, you can put that into the box to kind of say, oh, you know, I really want to know what the student is working on, and you know, I would start off at the beginning of the year asking the teacher or the special educator or somebody on the team, the point person on your team, to give you a weekly schedule. You really want to have it on your fridge. So on Monday mornings, you know, oh, you know what? Sally has speech today, Sally has gym today, and the OT also comes in class. And then, as however you design your homeschool communication, you know, especially if it's a daily thing, something like this, you can just sort of keep track about how many Mondays you're seeing. Oh, this student did work with, you know, Mrs. Smith, the speech therapist, and you know, making sure that, you know, initially when you get that daily schedule, all of the services that are in the IEP are listed on that weekly schedule. So, you know, you get that, you know, Monday through Friday thing, you see speech twice a week, you know, you see the in-class OT, you see, you know, the adapted phys ed, okay, you see that there. And then you can check with those services on your, you know, you can just sort of start keeping track of it in the homeschool communication that you design. Um, it's hard to know with any certainty exactly what is happening on a daily basis. Um, I think that the best thing that you can do in terms of following the service delivery grid is just sort of keep track of patterns that you may notice within your communication from home into school. And to the question of how do we make them implement the IEP, you know, hopefully they are implementing the IEP. Really the best thing you have is the progress notes. So you want to be keeping a close eye on your progress notes with whatever frequency they come to you, and really pay close attention to the, your student's your child's progress related to that. And if at anytime you feel like your child is not making progress or you're not happy with what the program is currently looking like, you can absolutely call the team back together at any time. You know, that's something that I do encourage parents to do if there is anything that they're just feeling uncomfortable with. If you're feeling like something is not being implemented or, you know, all this is in the IEP and I'm not seeing evidence that this is being followed, call the team together and say, you know what, I really want to talk about, you know, what's going on. I want to talk about the program. I want to talk about the progress that my child is making. And, you know, you can even request, as you request for a team meeting, you can also request for making sure that the teachers bring samples of what your student is working on. You know, I really want to look at the data. Can we come together and look at the data and really kind of make sure that, you know, that Johnny's making the progress that we want him to be right now. So I guess that's the best advice that I have. But it is hard to know with 100% certainty anything. Does that make sense? Are there any other questions or comments? Well, one thing I would love for you guys to do before you go, so we had the survey at the beginning. I'm going to show you this survey right now. I would love for you just to take a few seconds and just sort of evaluate, you know, where you think this webinar was for you currently in your situation. What did you find the most helpful? You know, make sure you give me some feedback about where you felt it was helpful, and also, you know, the MDSC is really looking to. The MDSC really wants to expand upon these webinar presentations because again we can reach a lot more of our members in this capacity. This is our very first webinar, so we're really pleased that you guys have logged on. But we'd really like to know what other topics you'd like to see presented as part of this webinar series, because we really want to make sure that our members are accessing information and getting what they need. So definitely take a few minutes to do this. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We're really happy that we're able to kick off this series, and we hope to see you again online. Next Tuesday is a presentation around um, the MCAS Alt, sort of demystifying the portfolio, what the portfolio is and what it isn't. So again, this is just the beginning of our series, and we really appreciate your feedback and we really appreciate your participation.